and then the rest of this album just completely loses me. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly and today I'm coming at you with yet another album ranking, and this time I'm going to be ranking all 8 studio albums from the English rock band Muse. So Muse is a band I have been familiar with for a while. They're also massively popular. I know a ton of people love Muse's songs, and I've definitely heard a lot of their more popular tracks, you could say, but I've never really sat and listened through beginning to end to all of their albums, and I thought it was about time for me to do that, and I figured I would go through, listen to all of their albums, and just rank them and see which one ends up being my favorite. Alright, so how my ranking system works, we've got A+ are going to be the Muse albums that I think are perfect. A is going to be the Muse albums that are just about perfect. There's like just 1 or 2 really minor issues I have with them. B is going to be the albums that are very solid, right in the middle. C's are kind of just the forgettable albums for me, and then D's are my least favorite Muse albums. Now I'm just going to go in order of when each Muse album was released. So that means I'm starting off with Showbiz. This is Muse's 1999 debut album, and this one I actually really got into. They definitely play around with a lot of different sounds on this album, and they make a great use of piano as well, which I really enjoyed. I think at times Showbiz tends to be a little bit long-winded. There's a couple points where it lulls a little bit for me, and it could have just been polished up a little bit more, but you can definitely see this as Muse's debut album, and you can hear kind of how they evolve from this first album of theirs. It's really cool, and it definitely has some fantastic moments on it. The track Sunburn, I absolutely love the build-up on this one. The piano is great. It kind of has this desperation quality to it. It just sounds like he's desperate for something. He's reaching out for something. That's the best way I can describe it. And there's definitely Radiohead vibes to this one as well, which I love. And Showbiz is another fantastic track. It just has a very classic Muse sound to it. And again, they do a great use of build-up on this one. At times, like I said on Showbiz, it does lull a little bit for me. There's some odd, almost borderline country sounding parts to this album that I'm not sold on, and it does kind of fall into this slightly more monotonous period at times on certain tracks, but overall I think Showbiz is a great debut album for Muse, and they kind of grew their sound and developed it from the high points on this album. So I think Showbiz by Muse, I think I'm going to put this one in B. It's definitely very solid, it's got some great tracks on it, and overall I really liked this album. Up next is going to be Muse's 2001 album Origin of Symmetry. This is exactly what I was saying, how Muse took the better parts of Showbiz and polished them up and then threw them onto Origin of Symmetry. This album is fantastic. It is so well put together. The tracks all kind of stand out with their own unique little moments, but they work extremely well together as an album. It's oddly a very unpredictable album for that reason. They blend a lot of different stuff here. At times there's a certain pop punk energy to it. At other times it's giving off major Radiohead vibes, but they just make it so cohesive. The track Bliss is so dreamy, and they definitely make some great use of synths on this one, and just all the layering that they do with the synths and the vocals, it's just fantastic. Space Dementia, the twists and turns that this track takes is awesome, and again, I love the piano. They definitely infuse piano and more natural instrumentation, and this album does a fantastic job of blending that with some more futuristic, modern, synth-sounding stuff. The track Plugin' Baby is an example of kind of that pop-punk sound I was talking about. It definitely gives off that vibe. Citizen Erased just pairs all of this really intense instrumentation with more restrained melodic vocals, which just makes for, again, a great combination of sounds. So Origin of Symmetry by Muse, I have no faults of this album. Every track is absolutely A+ in my opinion, and it's just fantastic. I would absolutely put Origin of Symmetry by Muse in A+. Up next is going to be Absolution. This is Muse's 2003 album, and this one I think takes the general vibe of Origin of Symmetry, but they infuse a little bit more of a energetic rock sound into it. Origin of Symmetry I think makes more use of like piano and synths, and Absolution just kind of throws a little more aggression into the mix, a little bit, like I said, more of that rock sound. It just goes a little bit heavier. I'd say it's a little more up-tempo than Origin of Symmetry. The track Time Is Running Out is just such an awesome classic Muse song. I also love the track Stockholm Syndrome with the piano. They're still incorporating that. And then they got some synths on there. But it's just a sonically really cool track to listen to. And the track Hysteria, again, just there's more energy on this one, and they bring it with the guitars on Hysteria. This track is definitely a standout on this album for me. I love it. So Absolution by Muse, the bottom line is, I think as an album, Origin of Symmetry works better and is more cohesive, but arguably Absolution has better tracks on it, in my opinion. So I'm kind of torn. I think I'm going to put Absolution in A+ with Origin of Symmetry. I think I would put Origin of Symmetry above Absolution though. All right, and up next is Black Holes and Revelations. This one came out in 2006. It's got a very dramatic theatrical tone to it. They definitely push kind of the sound effects a little bit further on this album compared to their first three. And there's definitely less of that piano going on as well, like the organic, more natural instrumentation. I didn't notice that as much on Black Holes and Revelations. I will say, I think for me personally, this album is just a tiny little bit front heavy. It kind of lost me a little bit at times toward the end, like the middle and the end of this album. At times, but overall, really, really solid. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to this one. Take a Bow is really cool. It's a great build up and a great start to this album with all the synths going on. And then it just leads right into track 2, Starlight, which is just an awesome, again, classic Muse song. I love that one. Map of the Problematique might be my favorite track on this whole album. I just love the instrumentation on this one. It's so unique and it just really stood out to me. And City of Delusion, I liked all the jazziness to this one, and they throw a lot of effects on here. And then they pair it with some acoustic guitar and violin as well. Just again, a lot of sounds going on with this album. And I think at certain points it maybe misses the mark a tiny little bit, but overall, fantastic listen, very entertaining for sure. So I think I feel pretty comfortable putting Black Holes and Revelations in A. I definitely prefer it over Showbiz, but it's not on par with Absolution or Origin of Symmetry. Up next is Muse's 2009 album, The Resistance. This one definitely grabs hold of the theatrical elements of Black Holes and Revelations and just runs with it. This album is so theatrical and grand and sweeping with its instrumentation and everything and just its overall sound. There's definitely some interesting ambient stuff going on, but they kind of go away from the whole synth electronic side and they embrace the piano and the again, the theatrical, more classical instrumentation. I honestly kind of found it to be almost too big, grand sounding for my taste anyway. But there are definitely some standout moments on this album. I love Uprising, just a classic Muse song, probably one of their most well-known songs. Undisclosed Desires was also a standout. I like the sort of plucky instrumentals. It's got an interesting tempo to it, a little bit more slowed down. And Unnatural Selection was another standout. I liked how this one had a little bit more of a rock guitar heavy side to it, which that's kind of what I wanted more of on this album. I just found it to be a little bit, like I said, almost too polished sounding with the instrumentals. I wanted a little bit more of that raw, dark quality to it. So ultimately, The Resistance, I think it's a good album. It definitely has some great tracks on it, but I do kind of find it a little bit forgettable. I think I'm going to put it in C. I am on the fence. I'm close to putting it in B, but I just don't really find myself going back to listen to this one. Up next is Muse's 2012 album, The Second Law. This one, again, they kind of take another turn. They depart from that orchestral sound that I was talking about on The Resistance, and they embrace a more futuristic, streamlined, modern sound on The Second Law. They still definitely have that theatricality to the sound on this album. It's just less in your face and obvious. They kind of fuse it with, again, more futuristic sounding stuff and more of the kind of heavier rock elements from their earlier albums. As much as I like this album, I don't love it. Like, there aren't really any tracks I dislike, but Other than one, there's not really any real standouts on this album for me either. That one track though is Madness. Madness by Muse is fantastic. It's definitely one of their most popular tracks, and for good reason. I do also like the opening track Supremacy. It kind of carries the theatricality from their last album into the Second Law, and it just has a great dramatic sound to it. It's a good start to this album. So overall, the Second Law, I like this album. I'm kind of torn on where to put it. Again, it's kind of like The Resistance. I'm between C and B, but ultimately I think the Second Law is a better crafted album. I just like the sound of it more than The Resistance. So I think I'm going to put the Second Law there in B. I'll put it below Showbiz though. Up next is Drones. This is Muse's 2015 album, and this one's kind of weird, I'll be honest. I can't say I really got into the overall vibe of this album. They definitely make use of some interesting elements on Drones. There's some electronic stuff, some synth going on. There's a lot of energy, but for me personally, the whole conceptual idea of the theme going on with Drones, just almost they took it too far. It's a little bit theme heavy. Ultimately, Drones for me would be my least favorite Muse album, and I would put it in D. However, there is one track on this album that is actually one of my favorite Muse songs. I love it, and it is Dead Inside. The first track on Drones is killer. It's so good. And then the rest of this album just completely loses me. It's like it starts off with such a bang with Dead Inside, and then it just totally flatlines, again, for me personally. So ultimately for me, I think I'm going to put Drones in C, and I'm going to put it below The Resistance. Like I said, I would put Drones in D, but it has Dead Inside on it, so I'm going to upgrade it to C. Alright, and last up is Muse's most recent album to date, Simulation Theory. This one came out in 2018. This one definitely takes a departure from their more classical rock sound, and they definitely embrace a more pop, electronic synth side. Not that that's anything new for Muse necessarily, like they've incorporated synth and electronic stuff on all of their previous albums, but this one just takes it and runs with it. It goes really heavy with the electronic sound. They play around with a lot of different sounds on this album, and there's definitely a lot of experimentation going on, which is cool. I appreciate that they're doing that. It just kind of loses almost a sort of authenticity though to their sound. I think Algorithm is kind of a cool starting track, I guess. Probably one of the standouts on this album if I had to pick one. And I think the one track on Simulation Theory that I do really get into is The Void. It's still very synth heavy, but they just infuse that piano on it, which balances it out a little bit. That's kind of what's needed more on this album, I think. But overall, Simulation Theory, I wanted to get into this album. I just really didn't though. I don't know. It almost just sounds too processed and artificial and like wrapped up in a big shiny bow. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just my personal taste anyway. So I think Simulation Theory by Muse, I'm going to put in D. So there you have it. That is my final Muse album ranking. So in A+, the perfect albums, we have Origin of Symmetry and Absolution. In A, which are almost perfect, we have Black Holes and Revelations. In B, which are the albums that are just pretty solid, we have Showbiz and The Second Law. In C, which are kind of the slightly forgettable albums, we have The Resistance and Drones. And then in D, which are my personal least favorites, we just have Simulation Theory. So there it is. That's my final Muse album ranking to date. I really enjoyed doing this video, listening to all of these albums, and giving Muse's stuff more of a deep dive listen to. I was definitely due to make this video because, like I said, I've been a fan of some of Muse's more popular stuff for a long time now. So I'm finally glad I took the dive into their discography and really gave all of their stuff a thorough listen to. Definitely let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with my ranking and what your top Muse album is. And yeah, as usual, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.